Hey everyone, welcome to Nerdarchy for Nerds by Nerds. I'm Nerdarchist Ted, and today I'm joined by.
Nerdarchy Dave.
And today we ask the question: is the Identify spell destroying the narrative in your D&D game?
Jump down the description below where you can find Nerdarchy, the newsletter, and gain weekly tips as well as learn how to game with Nerdarchy.
All right, so Identify has been a spell that's been in the game for a while, but it hasn't always been there.
Now, back in the early days of AD&D, when we started playing, 1E, 2E, we always had to find someone to identify the magic items for us and pay them gold, or you had to use trial and error and just figure it out.
I can remember going on quests and, oh, we found something, and you got to go into town and try and see if, like, oh, is there anybody here that can identify this stuff? It wasn't on your wizard spell list. You had to go do it. So what does that mean now?
All right, so over on the website, nerdarchy.com, there will be a link in the description. There was a really good article written just about this, how to change things up, how to use the Identify spell, or not use it in your game, depending on what you want from the game. So I guess the question is, what are some reasons why you wouldn't want to use Identify, and you might want to just take it out of your 5e game?
Well, you've got to look at it from multiple perspectives. If you put an item in the game that's got powers, sometimes there's fun in the exploration. Sometimes you want to reach out there and allow the players to figure out what it is. Now, it might not be great if it's just a +1 sword, but if you've got a wand that does a bunch of different things, then maybe you want them to figure it out because there's going to be hilarity behind it.
Now, I kind of found going through the editions and playing with a lot of different players over the years that there was aspects to both that I really liked. I liked the idea of them having to figure it out and kind of blunder through, or go on a quest to meet somebody that's going to tell them what it does, or interact with the crazy wizard on the hill that lives in the tower. Like, all that stuff was really good. But from the other end of it, from not so much the narrative, but the mechanical aspect of the game, it was a real pain in the ass. Like, as the GM, you had to remember what all their gear did if they haven't figured it out yet. You had to remember to calculate their armor class and their to hit and their damages. And after a while, I think I started like segueing from from making them figure everything out to, okay, well, you've been using this sword for a while and it's really got a good balance to it and it's a little bit easier to swing and it cuts a little deeper. Yeah, add +1 to hit and damage, going forward, because it just made my job a lot easier.
The player now knows the character doesn't have to worry about it because it's just a good sword. And those type of things, it winds up making it easier on the DM to just, okay, take care of this bookkeeping for me because I don't want to do it anymore. But on the other end of why you would want to not, have the Identify spell, there's quick turnaround in most games of, oh, you found items. All right, I cast Detect Magic. Well, now the mystery is gone. Everything in that pile that's possibly magic is gonna glow, and the next time you set camp, the wizard pulls out his book, he casts Identify, now you know what all the stuff is. There is no exploration, there is no trial and error. I once had in a 2nd edition game, no, it was a 3rd edition game. We didn't have a wizard in the party, and I was using a double-bladed sword. And you're like, well, these kind of things are just not going to come up. To find a magic one, you're going to have to wait and see if you find something in the game. Well, we wind up finding this weird candlestick that was made of odd metals, and I looted it, or the party looted it. We didn't know what it was, and it wound up getting just stuck in the bag of stuff for several sessions. And eventually we meet somebody who like trades and is able to cast spells. And we're like, tell us what this stuff is. And that's when we went and found out that, oh, this thing emits blades of light, double-bladed lightsaber if you want to go down that road. But I had it on my possession for multiple sessions, possibly for like 6. without knowing what it was. And the identify spell would have totally, detect magic and identify would have totally mucked this whole progress up.
Or just made it easier and you would have known what you had all along. There's that. But also too, like in earlier editions when I was a player and we had to figure things out and we would have to go to the wizard, it was also an opportunity to role play and meet this character and actually live in a breathing world. And this person became someone we go to regularly because he was the only guy that could do it. So you get to know him. He can become a quest giver. Oh, you don't have gold for this? Well, I need this thing done. You do the thing for me, and then I'll identify your items for you, and I'll check it out. Or, oh, this is a little trickier than normal, so it's going to take a little bit longer. So it also
Why don't you leave it here and come back?
So it also inserted some controls into the game for your GM to kind of like moderate how quickly he wanted you to use that stuff and know what it does. Or the other thing with the trial and error is like something happens in the game and then all of a sudden this thing you've been carrying all along activates and does something spectacular or horrifying as the case may be. So like when everything is just getting identified immediately, you kind of lose those moments.
So I definitely see both sides of this coin. In the current game, 5th edition, Identify reveals all magical properties. Back in earlier editions, we had, our 3rd edition had Analyze the Wiomer. It was 6th level spell, bards, sorcerers, and wizards could cast it, and it was a much more powerful version of Identify. It sought out other things that you could do, but like, to me, I would want to take that spell and say, all right, if you've got something that's a legendary item or you've got something that's an artifact, I don't want to give that out and be able to have you instantly know using a pitiful little 1st level spell and know everything about this item. So in my current game, you guys got access to an artifact. And of course, as is current, let me identify it. So I said, oh, well, it does this, because I gave you a sampling of what it could do. But after multiple sessions later, you talk to a being of power, and he's like, well, it does more than you think it does. So no one had explored with it. No one had played around with it. So I'm like, you know what? I'll let them figure it out what's going to happen. And, perhaps you guys can get access to, legend lore. I think might be a good replacement for Analyze the Wiomer, or you could really have that cutoff since the 6th and higher level spells are that much more powerful to create a spell like that for 5th and be able to say, all right, you're going to need something like that to just know what legendary and artifact abilities have.
I remember playing, AD&D. I think the Identify spell was there. It was just a little more dangerous to use it back then, and it probably wasn't automatic because I had a gray elf that got reincarnated into an ogre magi, and he was a wizard. Well, he found a belt or a girdle, and he wanted to know what it did, so he was going to identify it. So, back then to do that, you had to handle the item, and if it happened to be cursed, the curse took effect.
Right.
So he had to put it on, and he did. And then he was a she. It was, a girdle of masculinity, femininity. So, that was probably the only time I ever played cross-gender as well, and not by choice. And so I was an ogre magi, and I could polymorph all the time. But no matter what form I took, it was always female. So it was more dangerous back then to use those kind of items as well.
So that does create, these stories, these great things. And, Identify has muted and changed. So there's some people who they want more narrative control. They want to be able to reach out and limit what the players have access to. And not because it's this is too powerful, but it's breaking that story. It's breaking the exploration, which is one of the 3 pillars of the game.
Now, in my current 5th edition game that I run every Tuesday night at Scarlet Sisterhood, none of them have the ability to identify magic items. So they always go to Jarissa, the mage, and over at the library, and Bucket is his clockwork assistant. So it creates these, it's kind of cool. So it's like a little bit of an old school feel where, it creates these role-playing moments inside the game, and they really get to know this NPC, and they start leaning on them for other things, and then eventually, you know what? That NPC will start asking them for favors. So it does add to the game that way.
Yeah. So like these extra role-playing moments, they do add so much more to the game. So if you're going to make any kind of change of how you're going to run things in your game, I think you need to really talk to your players and make sure they're aware. So if you run a session zero, or you do a session zero, it's the perfect time to talk about this in your game. And there's a couple different options. You can, one, just strike identify from the game entirely, and you're going to have to go find someone who's got this mystic power, shamans, witch doctors. Perhaps there's only somebody that's dangerous to talk to because he's a little crazy, because he's been affected by multiple curses. You could put a really interesting character in your game that can do that. But, perhaps that's too harsh of a penalty. Well, perhaps identify needs to be restructured, and you could take it and explain it as a character would do it. Oh, this weapon is more balanced or more destructive, or oh, this allows you to control flames. Well, how limiting is that? So you wind up getting into a descriptive, not a mechanical structure of what it does. And maybe you need to still do that trial and error, but you have an idea of what it is and whether or not it's for a character. You get a wand that can produce a spell. Well, great. Is it casting fireball or cure wounds? Very big difference. But you can describe those, descriptively. Last option is to go what I was suggesting with, you take identify, and it's got the ability to only offer up so much information. So the more powerful it is, the less information it reveals. And through trial and error while playing the game, you'll get access to more. Or you really need something like Legend Lore, Analyze Dweomer to handle your legendary or artifacts.
Well, that's a good point, Ted. You could always modify this spell. And like you said, you have to make your players aware going into the game so that they have everyone has the same expectations. So going in, maybe you do limit it. Maybe identify only works one property at a time. And maybe that pearl that you have to use for it actually gets consumed by the spell, making it more expensive. So they're going to want to use it less. And maybe they're just going to want to experiment and not worry about spending on it. Or they might get things and be like, oh, it's a potion. Maybe we should just sip them and find out instead. I really don't want to spend the gold again.
I remember spending 100 gold per item back in the days, and that is rough.
Well, that's what my current party does. They go to see Jarissa, and they're like, standard rate, and he's like, yep. And then they they pay it, and they find out what their stuff does. But they like it because they like to go visit the different NPCs.
All right, so how about you guys? How are you handling the identify spell? Is any of this stuff just wacky mumbo jumbo, or is this something that you want to insert and change the rules in your game? Continue the conversation down in the comments below. While you're down there, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.
You can check us out over at nerdarchy.com.
So until next time,
Stay
stay nerdy.